That's what $1 trillion got you. I've got military experts in here saying, this is the biggest fleecing of the public in the history of this country. But it goes totally... So, you know, that's a question you might want to ask if you happen to run into a former Secretary of Defense, just in your travels. What I also talk about in here is what all this military spending, what it does to the economy. It has economic consequences that I think people don't realize. And just to focus on just one of them, the problem is that when your firm caters to the Pentagon, it becomes less attuned to, you know, cost control. When the major client is the Pentagon, cost control is not their major concern. And I'm not even saying that to be flippant or tongue-in-cheek, but from the Pentagon's point of view, they will find the money one way or another. For them, they're much more concerned about how well can you work with the military community? How well can you deal with the fact that we might be changing our requests of you, you know, every few weeks or something? How well can you adapt? How well do you speak our language? Cost, you know, it's a concern, but it's not number one. And so what begins to happen is that these firms begin to lose their competitive edge because they're not under that kind of market discipline anymore. And I show in here how this happened to the once robust U.S. machine tool industry, which is the envy of the world. Then the Pentagon became its major client, and suddenly the machine tool industry becomes very uncompetitive, weirdly unable to keep up with cost cuts anywhere else in the world. In fact, in the 60s, the big thing was something called numerical control machine tool technology. Now, the Japanese developed it cheaply. The Germans developed it cheaply. The U.S. firms developed it, but at a price no private firm could possibly afford. Only the Pentagon could afford it. Well, this sort of thing we see seeping through anyone who touches the Department of... In fact, when we look at some of these major firms like Grumman and Boeing, and some of them that then went into trying to provide mass transit systems. Well, you'll just have to read about that. But like Grumman provided buses for New York City that were so bad and broke down so much that the city ended up suing the company. And this is like it's an epidemic, but it's generally not talked about. And then we could, again, there's just so many things I could tell you about here. I mean, really, it's an embarrassment of riches. But I want to start closing, because what we're dealing with here is more than about just spending or balanced budgets or debt. We're dealing really here with right and wrong. And I want to close with, and don't get your hopes up, I am probably going to go right up to the end when I say I'm going to close, but this is a long close. We're building up to something. I want to close with a little story from, and don't give away the punchline, people, some of you who know this, all you dorky philosophers out there. Robert Nozick was a Harvard philosopher who, don't flee when you hear Harvard philosopher, get me the heck out of here. Robert Nozick wrote this book, Anarchy, State, and Utopia, in 1974. And I want to go through the good. Then you got people like me. Nozick didn't go far enough. Okay. All right, basically it's this. I want to share with you his tale of the slave. And it goes through 9 stages, but they're all brief. He says the first stage is, you are a slave at the mercy of a brutal master who forces you to work for his purposes and beats you arbitrarily. Second stage, the master decides to beat you only for breaking the rules and even grants you some free time. Third, you are part of a group of slaves subject to this master. He decides, on grounds acceptable to everyone, how goods should be allocated among you all. Fourth, the master requires his slaves to work only 3 days per week, granting them the other 4 days off. They can do as they wish during their free time. Fifth, the master now allows the slaves to work wherever they wish. His main caveat is that they must send him 3/7 of their wages, corresponding to the 3 days' worth of work they once had to do on his land every week. In an emergency, he can force them to do his bidding once again, and he retains the power to alter the fraction of their wages to which he lays claim. Sixth, the master grants all 10,000 of his slaves, except you, the right to vote. They can decide among themselves how much of their and your earnings to take and what outlets to fund with the money. They can decide what you are and are not allowed to do. We can suppose, for the sake of argument, that the master irrevocably grants this right to the 10,000 slaves. You now have 10,000 masters or a single 10,000-headed master. 7th, you are granted the freedom to try to persuade the 10,000 to exercise their vast powers in a particular way. You still do not have the right to vote, but you can try to influence those who do. 8th, the 10,000 grant you the right to vote, but only to break a tie. You write down your vote, and if a tie should occur, they open it and record it. No tie has ever occurred. 9th, you are granted the right to vote, but functionally it simply means, as in the 8th stage, that in the case of a tie, which has never occurred, your vote carries the issue. Nozick's question is this: at what stage between 1 and 9 did this become something other than the tale of a slave? Now that's the kind of question we rarely consider, because it's an unexamined premise of our society, that society can't function unless we have one single institution telling 309 million people what to do, how much of their labor they're entitled to the fruits of, and so on and on. And yes, it throws the poor a few scraps, but in 1,001 open and covert ways, this institution enriches various elites at the expense of the rest of the population. The more it grows, the worse it gets. More and more sectors of society conclude that they too must enrich themselves by means of government-granted privilege. Everyone begins to clamor for subsidies, just in order to break even. The industrialists take, the farmers take, the scientists take, the military establishment takes, the social workers take, the education bureaucracy takes. Everybody takes. All of this looting under cover of law is what Frederick Bastiat, the great 19th century French economic thinker, memorably called legal plunder. Because nobody considers it legitimate to stick a gun in his neighbor's ribs and take his stuff. But we're taught to believe that a dramatic moral difference separates that kind of direct stealing from the indirect kind. That is to say, when the government sticks a gun in your neighbor's ribs and hands the proceeds to you. Nozick put it like this: when you tax away from someone the fruits of 5 months of his labor, you are taking from him 5 months of his life. Dance around that issue all you want. Use Orwellian synonyms all you like. But this is forced labor by any reasonable definition of the term. Can this really be the most humane way for human beings to interact with each other? Is it so unthinkable to imagine a society in which we put the guns down and we interact with each other on the basis of reason and compassion? But in particular, it is long past time, with this catastrophe staring us in the face, that we set a match to that 6th grade textbook. We understood the nature of the state. We really see what this institution is. Let us see it for what it is. Because the propaganda with which we are flooded regarding how indispensable the political class is, oh, they're all just selfless public servants, is unworthy of a 6th grader. We would not die instantly in the absence of the Joe Bidens and the Mitch McConnells. We would flourish. And here's the proof. Thank you.